You are the first son, Chibeze, she would whisper. The throne belongs to you, and no one can take that from you. In the ancient kingdom of Umodu, nestled deep within the lush green forests of the eastern part of Nigeria, there reigned a powerful king named Eze Ikenna. His kingdom was vast, with rivers that shimmered like silver under the sun and lands that stretched beyond the horizon. Eze Ikenna was a white ruler, known for his fairness and strength, and his people prospered under his reign. Yet, despite the wealth and peace that surrounded him, the king carried a deep, unshakable longing in his heart. More than gold, more than the fertile lands that fed his people, Eze Ikenna desired an heir, sons who would carry his legacy forward, who would sit on his throne and ensure the name of his lineage lived on for generations. To him, having sons was more valuable than all the treasures of the earth. This desire consumed him, casting a shadow over his every joy. He had many wives, each as beautiful and gracious as the next, yet none had borne him a son. As the years passed, the king's hope grew more desperate, and his once joyous heart became restless. He sought the counsel of elders, diviners, and priests, offering sacrifices to the gods, praying day and night to be blessed with sons. But despite his efforts, the heavens remained silent, and the king grew ever more troubled. For in the old days, the legacy of a king was not measured by his wealth or his conquests, but by the strength of his lineage. And without sons to carry his name, Eze Ikenna feared his legacy would crumble like dust in the wind. Eze Ikenna, in his unyielding quest for an heir, had already taken 6 wives. His palace echoed with the beauty and grace of these women, each chosen with the hope of bringing forth the sons he so desperately desired. Yet, none of them had borne him a child, except his first wife, Lolo Amaka, who had given birth to a daughter. The girl, Adanna, was a jewel in the king's eyes, wise beyond her years and beloved by the people. But to Eze Ikenna, as precious as she was, Adanna was not the son he yearned for. 5 long years had passed after Adanna's birth, and not one of the king's other wives had been able to conceive. The palace, once filled with hope and anticipation, grew quiet with concern. Rumors began to spread through the kingdom, whispering that perhaps the gods had turned away from Eze Ikenna. The people too began to share in the king's growing fear, for they knew that without an heir, the future of the kingdom hung in uncertainty. In time, the elders of Umodu gathered and sought answers from the gods, performing ancient rites and the consultations to discover the reason for this mysterious misfortune. After days of prayer and sacrifice, the gods delivered a message, a cryptic one. The elders returned to the king with solemn faces and delivered the words as they had heard them. What you seek has already been given. Learn contentment. These words left Eze Ikenna more confused than before. What did the gods mean? How could he learn contentment when he had not yet received what his heart desired most? He had no sons, only a daughter, and the god's message seemed like a riddle he could not solve. The king's anxiety deepened, and the uncertainty gnawed at him day and night. Despite the divine warning, Eze Ikenna refused to accept what he did not understand. His fear of losing his throne without a male heir drove him to take more drastic measures. Against the advice of his counselors, he went ahead and took a 7th wife, convinced that perhaps this new union would finally bring the sons he had longed for. But the kingdom of Umodu, once filled with peace, now felt the weight of a growing tension. The people whispered in secret, wondering what would come out of their king's relentless pursuit and what fate the gods had in store. Luck, it seemed, finally smiled upon Ezekiel, his seventh wife, Lolo Chidinma, a woman as graceful as the morning sun, conceived within her first year as queen. From the moment the news of her pregnancy reached King's chamber, the king's heart was filled with hope. The palace, once heavy with worry and unspoken dread, now paused with anticipation. All eyes were on Lolo Chidinma as her belly grew, the entire kingdom waiting to see if this child would be the long-awaited son. The first queen was elated and she went out of her way to ensure Chidinma had no trouble during her pregnancy. No expense was spared. Whatever Chidinma wanted, she got, and Lord Amaka saw to it that no one made her uncomfortable. The other wives who were not able to birth children were envious of all the attention not only the queen and king were giving to Chidinma, but also the entire kingdom seemed to wait on her hand and foot. But there was nothing any of them could do about it because she was the one heaven decided to smile upon, not them. So how could they blame her? So they stood by the sides, watching as the newest wife got all that their hearts craved and even more. When the time finally came for her to give birth, the air in the kingdom felt charged with excitement. As the sun set on the day of the child's birth, it was announced that Lolo Chidinma had delivered a healthy baby boy. The sounds of drums echoed through the kingdom and cries of joy filled the village. Eze, who had feared the gods might have forsaken him, was now overwhelmed with gratitude. The child, his long-sought heir, had arrived. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the people of Umodu had ever seen. For 7 days and 7 nights, the kingdom rejoiced. Musicians played their drums, flutes, and ekwe, filling the air with melodies that seemed to reach the heavens. Dancers adorned in vibrant colors and intricate beads performed in the palace courtyard, while villagers gathered to join in the festivities. The smell of roasted yam, palm wine, assorted meats, and soups drifted through the air as feasts were held in every corner of the kingdom. Eze named his son Chibreze, meaning God is king, in recognition of the divine intervention that he believed had finally come to pass. His joy knew no bounds as he gazed upon the tiny swaddled child in Lolo Chidinma's arms. To the king, this was not just a son, but a symbol of his legacy, the future ruler who would carry the crown of Umodu after him. The king's heart, for the first time in many years, was at peace. He spent hours in his obi with his infant son, dreaming of the day Chibreze would grow into a man. The people too shared in his happiness, knowing that the birth of the boy secured the kingdom's future. As the nights of celebration continued, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as though the heavens themselves were blessing the king's newfound joy. However, amid the joy and laughter, a few still remembered the cryptic words of the girls. What you seek has already been given. Learn contentment. These words lingered like an unsettled breeze, faint but persistent. Though they were drowned out by the sound of celebration, few could guess the significance of those words, and fewer still paid them any mind. But the gods do not speak in vain, and while Ezekiel and his people basked in the joy of the moment, the true meaning of the message had yet to reveal itself. 2 years passed after the birth of Prince Chibreze, and the kingdom of Umodu flourished under the shadow of this newfound joy. The people believed the birth of the prince had ushered in an era of favor from the gods. and the once quiet palace now rang with laughter and the coos of the young heir, as everyone in the palace ensured that the young prince was well taken care of. His mother was placed on a pedestal that no one had ever occupied. However, the kingdom was soon to witness an even greater mystery, one that no one could have predicted. One by one, Ezeikiena's other wives, those who had once been barren, began to conceive. It started with Lolo Nena, the second wife, who after years of longing suddenly found herself with child. Then Lolo Ifoma, the third wife, followed. And so it went. Each wife, in turn, took in and delivered a healthy baby boy at the appointed time. The people of Umodo marveled as the seemingly impossible unfolded before their eyes. With every new birth, the celebration in the palace grew. The once quiet chambers now bustled with activity as the cries of newborn sons echoed through the halls. The women who had known years of heartache and worry were now blessed with the joy of motherhood, and the king's heart swelled with pride as he watched his family grow. Even more astonishing, after a few years, Lolo Chidima herself bore yet another son, adding to the already growing number of princes. It was as though the gates of the heavens had flung open and blessings poured down upon Ezekiena's household. With each new son, the kingdom erupted in jubilation. Drums were beaten, feasts were held in the villages, and praises to the gods filled the air. 7 sons now graced the king's lineage, and the people of Umodo spoke of the great fortune that had come upon them. And Lolo Chidima was even more revered, for it was her son, Prince Chibeze, who had been the first to open the way for the others. The people whispered that it was her arrival in the king's life that had brought joy and fruitfulness to the kingdom. Songs were sung in her honor, calling her Nne Onwucha, the mother who swept away sorrow. She was now seen as a symbol of abundance and favor, the queen who had transformed the fate of the royal household. As the years went on, the 7 princes grew strong, each more handsome than the last, and the kingdom of Umodo thrived in their presence. Ezekiena's joy was unmatched, and he often looked at his sons with a deep sense of fulfillment. His heart full of pride, his dream of leaving behind a legacy of strength and unity seemed not just fulfilled, but surpassed beyond his wildest hopes. But amidst all this joy, there was one wife who remained untouched by the wave of new life. Lolo Amaka, the first wife, had given birth only to Adanna, her daughter. Unlike the others, she bore no sons, and though the king's love for her remained, a quiet sadness lingered in her heart. She watched as the other wives cradled their sons, knowing that Adanna, her daughter, would not inherit the throne in a kingdom where men ruled. Still, Lolo Amaka remained dignified, always poised, always supportive of her husband's happiness and the well-being of the other wives and their sons. As for Adanna, she grew into a bright and sharp-witted young maiden, admired by many for her beauty and kindness. Yet, she too felt the weight of her unique position in the family. While the kingdom celebrated the 7 princes, she was the quiet observer, beloved but not celebrated in the same way her brothers were. Lolo Amaka was not only the first wife of Ezekiena, but also his most trusted companion. She had stood by his side through the early years of his reign, long before the other wives had arrived in the palace. Her beauty was matched only by her wisdom, and her heart was known to be kind and steadfast. While others might have envied the many sons that filled the palace, Amaka did not allow bitterness to take root in her heart. She had given birth to a daughter, Adanna, whom she loved deeply, and she believed that the sons of the king were not just the children of other wives, but hers as well. In her mind, Every child born of the king carried the same royal blood, and they all belonged to the kingdom. Lolo Amaka had a wise soul, and she knew that jealousy and envy were poisons to the heart. So instead of feeling resentment for the other wives who bore sons, she opened her arms to them, welcoming their children as though they were her own. She often visited the nurseries, cradling the infants with affection and playing with the young princes as they grew. She spoke kindly to the other wives, offered advice when they needed it, and helped to maintain peace in the palace. The other wives acknowledged her grace and wisdom. But as time passed and more sons were born, things began to change. Despite the growing number of the princes, Amaka never lost sight of her daughter Adanna. She poured her heart into raising her, making sure that Adanna would one day grow into a woman worthy of her place in the kingdom. Amaka taught her daughter the importance of humility, compassion, and wisdom virtues that would set her apart. In the privacy of their chambers, Amaka would whisper, "My daughter, though you are not a son, you carry a power in your spirit that no one can take from you. You are the first seed of your father's kingdom, and that makes you special beyond any crown." Adanna grew up under these great teachings. Her beauty was radiant, but it was her intelligence that set her apart. She listened closely to her mother's teachings, learning about the ways of the world, the delicate balance of power in the palace, and the role she must play as the eldest child of the king. As the years went by, her wisdom grew as much as her beauty. She became her mother's pride, a shining example of grace and wisdom, admired by the elders and respected by the people. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect harmony, jealousy was beginning to brew. The other wives, once content with their place in the palace, began to show their true colors. Lolo Chidinma in particular had grown proud and arrogant with the praise and reference showered upon her by the kingdom. She had become known as the mother of princes, and the people believed that her presence had brought prosperity to the king's lineage. She relished in this adoration, allowing it to inflate her sense of importance. And while Amaka treated her and her sons with kindness, Chidinma began to harbor a quiet disdain for the first wife. She thought less of Amaka for not giving the king a son and considered her undeserving of her position as the queen mother. It started with small subtle comment words cloaked in false kindness. "Ah, Lola Amaka," Chidinma would say, her tone laced with sweet venom. "It must be hard for you, watching all these sons grow strong, knowing you have only a daughter. But of course, we all know how much the king loves Adanna. She's after all his first child." Chidinma would smile, her words seeming polite but cutting deep. And though Amaka tried to brush it off, the stench remained. As time went on, Chidinma's arrogance grew. She rallied the other wives, who perhaps out of fear of falling for favor, began to join in the quiet mockery. They made sure that Amaka knew her place, reminding her in whispered conversations that she alone had failed to provide the king with a son. "The line of the king runs through his sons," they would say. "A daughter is precious, but she cannot rule. It's our sons who will carry his name." At first, Amaka endured their words in silence, refusing to let them taint her heart. She continued to raise Adanna with love and dignity, encouraging her daughter to rise above the pettiness of the palace politics. But as the whispers turned into outright exclusion, life in the palace became increasingly unbearable. The other wives, especially Chidinma, began to undermine Amaka's presence at every turn. She was no longer invited to certain gatherings among the women in the palace. And when the wives gathered to discuss important matters, they often spoke over her, treating her as though she were invisible. Chidinma, now intoxicated with her power, would flaunt her sons in front of Amaka, always ensuring that she felt the weight of her childlessness. "Look how strong my sons have grown," she would say loudly, casting a glance at Amaka. "It's a blessing to have sons who will one day rule. I sometimes wonder what it must feel like to only have a daughter." For Adanna, the mocking of her mother was unbearable. She could see the pain in Amaka's eyes, though her mother tried to hide it. The once warm and nurturing atmosphere in the palace had grown cold and hostile, and Adanna's heart ached as she watched her mother, who had always been the epitome of grace, now treated as an outsider in her own home. But Lolo Amaka, wise and resilient, reminded her daughter never to let bitterness consume her. "Adanna," she would say gently, "people's words are like the wind. They come, they blow, and then they are gone. What remains is how we carry ourselves. Never forget that your worth is not determined by the number of sons or titles. You are your own strength, my daughter, and one day the world will see it." Still, despite her mother's efforts to shield her, Adana began to feel the weight of their isolation. She longed to protect her mother from the cruelty of the other wives. But in a palace where sons were celebrated and daughters overlooked, both Amaka and Adana found themselves slowly pushed to the sidelines. Eze Ikenna, now the proud father of 7 sons, was often too caught up in the joy of watching his lineage grow to notice the subtle shifts within his household. His sons were his pride and joy, the future of the kingdom. He made no secrets of his affection for them. He doted on each boy, ensuring that they were provided with the best tutors, the finest clothes, and the most skilled warriors to teach them the ways of battle. The king believed that by investing in their upbringing, he was securing the future of Umodo. However, Ezeikiena's attention was divided. With the birth of his sons, he became less aware of the dynamics between his wives, particularly the tension that had begun to form around Lolo Amaka and her daughter, Adanna. In his eyes, Amaka remained his beloved first wife, the queen mother of the kingdom, and Adanna, though not a son, held a special place in his heart. Yet, as time passed, the king's focus naturally shifted towards the young princess, and the first queen and her daughter found themselves slowly fading into the background. The other wives, especially Lolo Chidima, seized this opportunity to elevate their own sons. They pampered the boys relentlessly, feeding their egos and reminding them daily that they were the true future of the kingdom. "You are princes," they would tell their sons, "born to rule, born to lead." Each mother filled her child's head with grand visions of power and privilege, ensuring that they understood their place above all others, including Adanna. The boys, eager to please their mothers, grew up with a sense of entitlement. They were lavished with gifts, celebrated in grand ceremonies, and treated like little kings within and outside the palace. Chidima, in particular, spared no effort in ensuring that her sons, Chibueze and his younger brother, were raised with the finest luxuries. She often reminded the other wives and anyone who would listen that it was her presence in the king's life that had brought such prosperity to the royal family. Her sons, she believed, were destined for greatness, and she did everything in her power to ensure that they knew it. As the boys grew older, this pampering began to take its toll. The princes became arrogant and lazy, believing the world revolved around them. They roamed the palace grounds with little regards for the servants or the common people, secure in the knowledge that their status as the king's sons protected them from any consequences. They were quick to boast of their future roles as leaders, often speaking over their tutors and disregarding advice from elders who tried to instill humility in them. The mothers, proud of the attention their sons received, turned a blind eye to this behavior, encouraging their sons to think of themselves as untouchable. While Ezeikenna adored his sons, he was unaware of the arrogance that was festering within them. The king, busy with matters of state and the governance of the kingdom, saw only the potential in his children. He envisioned a strong and united Umuodo, led by his 7 sons, each of whom he believed would grow into wise and capable men. He often spoke of how the boys would one day divide responsibilities among themselves, ensuring the kingdom's future prosperity. But Eze Ikenna, blinded by his dream of a great legacy, did not see the cracks forming in the foundation of his household. Amaka, ever the wise and perspective queen, saw what the king could not see. She watched as the princes grew more entitled, their mothers fanning the flames of their arrogance, and she feared for what this might mean for the future. While the other wives lavished their sons with praise and indulgence, Amaka focused on nurturing Adanna's mind and spirit. She knew that her daughter, as a woman in a kingdom ruled by men, would have to be twice as strong, twice as wise, to navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics. But life was becoming more difficult for Amaka and Adanna. The older wives, emboldened by their sons' growing favor with the king, became increasingly hostile. Chidinma, who had once only hinted at her disdain, now made her contempt for Amaka clear. "Your daughter is not more than a decoration," she would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "A pretty flower in a garden of kings. What future does she have among so many princes? At best, she will marry a king or prince, but the kingdom belongs to me and my sons." The other wives would laugh, casting sideways glances at Amaka, enjoying her silence. But what they failed to understand is that life is unpredictable. At every opportunity, Chidinma and the other wives made sure that Amaka and Adanna knew their place. They excluded them from discussions, mocked them in front of the servants, and undermined their influence in the palace. When important matters of the kingdom were discussed, Amaka's opinion were dismissed as irrelevant. The wives often whispered that Adanna's beauty would be her only worth, that she would one day be married off to some distant nobleman, while their sons would rule the kingdom. Despite the cruelty she faced, Lord Amaka remained strong. She refused to let the other wives break her spirit or that of her daughter. She would remind Adanna, "Do not let their words make you feel small, my child. You are a princess of Umuodo, and no one can take that from you. Strength is not measured in sons or crowns, but in the wisdom to know your worth." But even as Amaka held her head high, the walls of the palace began to close in around her. The sons of the king grew more arrogant, the wives more vicious, and the once harmonious household was slowly being torn apart by pride and jealousy. As time passed and the sons of the king grew older, Lord Amaka chose to distance herself from the turmoil of the other wives. She had tried several times, at different intervals, to bring her concern to Eze Ikenna. With a heavy heart, she would approach the king after observing the constant boasting and the increasing arrogance of the princes and their cruel escapades in and outside the palace. She explained how the boys, pampered by their mothers, were growing wild, entitled, and unruly. But Eze Ikenna, though he listened, dismissed her concerns with a simple wave of his hand. "Let their mothers discipline them," he had said. "They are sons of kings. Boys will be boys." With those words, Amaka knew that her place in the palace had grown more precarious. The king had made it clear that he expected the mothers to handle the upbringing of their sons. And so, Amaka withdrew from the affairs of the other wives, choosing instead to focus all her attention on Adanna, her daughter. She no longer tried to advise the king on the princes, nor did she involve herself in the discussions among the wives. She had accepted that she could not change the course of their behavior or the favoritism shown to the sons, and to preserve what little dignity she had left, she followed the advice of the king to let each woman discipline her own child. However, not all of the wives shared to the disdain that Chidinma had for Amaka. Lolo Nena, the second wife, had never been as arrogant or cruel as the others. She had always respected Amaka for her wisdom and grace, though she feared crossing Chidima, who seemed to control the social dynamics within the palace. But in her heart, Nena was uncomfortable with the way Amaka and Adana were treated. She observed the increasing recklessness of the princes and quietly grew concerned about the direction things were heading. Unlike the other wives, Nena saw the value in what Amaka had to offer. Though her own son, Ugochukwu, was still young, Nena feared he would be led astray by the pride and arrogance that had begun to define the other boys. Chidima's influence was strong, but Nena found herself slowly pulling away from the hold that the mother of princes had over the household. One day, after witnessing yet another moment of cruelty towards Amaka, Nena decided she could no longer remain silent. In small quiet gestures, Nena began to support Amaka. It started with a few conversations, soft-spoken words shared in the palace gardens when no one else was around. "I don't like the way they treat you, Amaka," Nena confided one afternoon as they sat near the royal courtyard. "I see the way the other wives act, and it's not right. You deserve more respect, Amaka." Surprised but touched by Nena's honesty, smiled gently. "It is the way of things now," she replied softly, "but I have my daughter, and that is enough for me." As the month passed by, Nena began to spend more time with Amaka and Adana, often seeking her advice on matters of the palace and life. She admired how Amaka carried herself with such dignity despite the challenges she faced. But more importantly, Nena sought Amaka's guidance in raising her son. She feared that Ugochukwu, like the other princes, would fall into the same arrogance and sense of entitlement if she didn't steer him carefully. Amaka, though hesitant at first, found herself willing to help Nena. After all, she had tried to warn the king about the behavior of the other princes, but his response had left her feeling powerless. Now, here was someone willing to listen, someone who understood the danger of raising children without proper guidance. Amaka decided that if she could not influence the upbringing of all the princes, she could at least help Nena raise Ugochukwu to be a noble and just man. "It's not too late for Ugochukwu," Amaka said one afternoon as she and Nena walked through the palace gardens. "He's still young, and you can shape him into the kind of man this kingdom will need. Do not let the ways of the other wives cloud your judgment. Raise him with humility and wisdom. Teach him that power is not a birthright, but something earned through respect and justice." Nena listened carefully, grateful for Amaka's guidance. Slowly but surely, she began to implement the advice, teaching Ugochukwu the values that Amaka had shared. She reminded him daily that being a prince was not about lording over others, but about serving the kingdom with honor. She refused to pamper him in the way that Chidima pampered her sons, ensuring that Ugochukwu grew up with a sense of responsibility rather than entitlement. Chidima, of course, noticed the growing closeness between Nena and Amaka. At first, she dismissed it as inconsequential, believing that no one could break her hold over the palace. But as Nena began to distance herself from Chidima's influence, Chidima's once tight grip on the wives began to weaken. She sensed a shift in the palace dynamics, though she could not fully understand why. Her arrogance blinded her to the quiet alliance that was forming between Amaka and Nena, and she continued to mock and belittle Amaka whenever the opportunity arose. For Amaka, this newfound bond with Nena brought a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Though she had resigned herself to the fact that she could not discipline the other princes, she found solace in helping Nena raise her son with the values she held dear. She saw in Ugochukwu the potential for a different kind of prince, one who could perhaps one day lead the kingdom with the grace and wisdom that the other princes lacked. As the relationship between Amaka and Nena deepened, so too did the rift between Nena and the other wives. Nena no longer participated in the mockery or exclusion of Amaka and Adana, and the other wives began to notice her absence in their gatherings. But Nnenna didn't care. She had found something far more valuable in her bond with Amaka, a true sense of sisterhood, built on mutual respect and a shared wisdom for the future. As the years passed and the princes grew into young men, the palace buzzed with tension. Chibueze, the firstborn son, had long assumed that the throne would naturally pass to him. His mother, Lolo Chidinma, had ensured that he was treated like the heir, always reminding him of his birthright. "You are the first son, Chibueze," she would whisper. "The throne belongs to you, and no one can take that from you." Emboldened by his mother's constant praise, Chibueze became increasingly arrogant, viewing his brothers not as equals but as rivals. The courts began to see the signs of his entitlement. He would often speak over the elders during important discussions, interrupting them with grandiose ideas that had little substance. The other princes, eager to stay in his good graces, began to mimic his behavior, boasting of their future roles and showing little regard for the traditions of humility that had once been cherished in the kingdom. Ugochukwu, however, was different. Raised with Amaka's guidance, he stood apart from his brothers, where they saw power as something to be flaunted. Ugochukwu saw it as a responsibility. He remained humble, listening to the elders and learning from their wisdom. He showed respect to the servants, and unlike his brothers, he was always mindful of the people's needs. As his reputation for wisdom and integrity grew, so did Chibueze's resentment. "What makes you think you are better than us, Ugochukwu?" Chibueze would sneer during their training sessions. "Do you think father will give the throne to you because you play the humble servant?" But Ugochukwu, ever calm, would only smile. "The kingdom's future matters more than who sits on the throne. We are all sons of the king. What is best for Umodo will be decided by the people and the gods." These words only fueled Chibueze's jealousy, and soon the tension between the brothers became obvious to all in the palace. Eze Ikenna had always dreamed of a united kingdom, ruled by his sons in harmony. But as he grew older, the discord between Chibueze and Ugochukwu became more obvious, and it began to trouble him deeply. He regretted not listening and adhering to the wise counsel that his first queen brought. If he had listened to her then, perhaps things would not have been this difficult. He could see that Chibueze, his firstborn, was growing reckless and arrogant. Yet tradition held that the firstborn son should inherit the throne. The king, once so sure of his son's futures, found himself facing an impossible choice. The elders, too, had begun to voice their concerns. In private meetings with the king, they expressed their worry that Chibueze's temperament was unsuited for leadership. He is quick to anger and slow to listen. One elder said, "These are not the qualities of a wise ruler." Another elder added, "Ugochukwu, on the other hand, shows the humility and wisdom we have long valued in our leaders." Eze Ikenna knew that choosing Ugochukwu over Chibueze would create unrest. Chibueze's pride would not allow him to step aside without a fight, and his mother Chidinma would surely stir trouble in the court. Yet the king also knew that the future of the kingdom was at stake. His decision could determine whether Umodo would thrive or fall into conflict after his death. As he sat alone in his chambers, the king pondered the advice of the elders, and his thoughts drifted to his daughter Adanna. Unlike her brothers, Adanna had stayed out of the power struggles in the palace. She had grown into a woman of grace and wisdom, just like her mother. She had given him several insights into the kingdom's affairs that had marveled him each time, and her insights, when implemented, had never failed. Though she was not in line for the throne, Eze Ikenna could not help but wonder what would have happened if she were a son. To have a woman on the throne? Such a thing had never been done in Umodo. The idea was both revolutionary and dangerous. Yet the more Eze Ikenna thought about it, the more he began to see that tradition was not always the best guide for the future. Chidinma, sensing that her son's claim to the throne was slipping, grew desperate. She had long seen herself as the queen who brought prosperity to the kingdom through her sons, and she could not bear the thought of her legacy being overshadowed by anyone else's child, least of all Ugochukwu, who was the fifth son. One afternoon, as the palace buzzed with preparation for a royal event, Chidinma approached Chibeze in a secluded garden. "You cannot let Ugochukwu take what is rightfully yours," she said, her voice sharp. "The elders speak of him as if he is the future of this kingdom. But you are the firstborn, Chibueze. You must assert your claim before it's too late." Chibueze, already furious with Ugochukwu's growing popularity, was easily swayed by his mother's words. "I will show them," he muttered. "I will show them that I am the true heir." That evening, during the grand feast, Chibueze confronted Ugochukwu in front of the entire court. "Brother," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "I hear the elders whisper your name as if you were the king's chosen heir. Tell me, what schemes have you and your mother concocted to steal the throne?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the two brothers. Ugochukwu stood calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. "There are no schemes," he said softly, "only what is best for the kingdom." Chibueze's face reddened with anger. "You think yourself wise, but you are weak. A true king would not shy away from a challenge." But Ugochukwu remained composed. "Strength comes not from the force, but from wisdom. If you believe that power alone makes a king, you misunderstand what it means to lead." The court, witnessing Ugochukwu's restraint in the face of Chibueze's fury, began to see the contrast between the two princes. Chibueze's outburst only served to further alienate him, while Ugochukwu's humility earned him more respect. The tension in the courts reached its peak as Ezekina prepared to announce his decision regarding the future of the throne. The entire kingdom held its breath, expecting nothing less than what tradition dictated. When the day of the announcement arrived, the royal court was filled with nobles, elders, and the king's family. Chibueze stood confidently beside his mother, sure that his birthright would be affirmed. Ugochukwu, calm but uncertain, stood by Nnenna, who had taught him to accept whatever fate the gods chose for him. But when the king spoke, it was not the name of either of the prince that fell from his lips. "Adanna," Ezekina said, his voice steady and clear, "my daughter will be crowned the princess and future ruler of Umodo." A stunned silence filled the court. Even Adanna, who had never aspired to the throne, was taken aback. She looked at her father in disbelief, unsure of how to respond. The court erupted in whispers. A woman on the throne? It was unheard of. The elders exchanged glances, some surprised, others thoughtful. Only Amaka remained composed, her eyes filled with quiet pride as she gazed at her daughter. Ezekina continued, "Leadership is not a matter of birthright or gender. It is a matter of wisdom, compassion, and the ability to unite. My daughter has shown these qualities, and I believe she is the leader this kingdom needs." Chidinma's face twisted in rage. "This is an insult," she shouted. "You deny your sons for a daughter, a woman?" But Ezekina did not waver. "The gods have spoken through the wisdom of our people. Adanna will be the crown princess, and she will lead us into the future." This unexpected news threw the kingdom into confusion, and the people became divided. Some were in support of the king's decision to allow wisdom to dictate his succession and not tradition, but others argued that tradition was instituted for a reason, and if tradition was now worthless, everyone might as well do as they like. But the king was not swayed. He had made mistakes in raising his sons, and he was not going to make another one by allowing one who is not worthy, son or not, to sit on the throne. He wanted to meet his ancestors with a clear account of the kingdom they had left in his care. As the tension grew to unimaginable levels, followed by Chidinma and her sons, a message was brought from the chambers of the chief priest. a reminder of the prophecy spoken decades ago when the king sought sons. What you seek has already been given. Learn contentment. As the message spread through the land, the people were silenced. For who could argue with the gods? This served to calm much of the tension, though some doubts still lingered. Adana had never imagined herself as the crown princess, let alone the future ruler of Umodo. For years, she had quietly accepted her position in the shadows, content to support her mother and observe the power struggles between her brothers. She had unconsciously imbibed many qualities from the troubles and difficulties she had faced as a daughter among many sons. But now, with the weight of the kingdom suddenly placed on her shoulders, she felt both unprepared and overwhelmed. After the announcement, Adana sought out her mother, Lord Amaka, for counsel. Mother, she said softly, how can I lead a kingdom that has never known a woman on the throne? How can I rule when even I did not see this coming? Amaka, ever the wise and steady guide, smiled gently at her daughter. You were born for this, Adana. I have raised you to understand the ways of the kingdom, to value wisdom over force, and to lead with compassion. The gods knew what they were doing when they gave you to me. You are more than capable. But Adana knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. The court, the people, and even her own family would constantly question her right to the throne. She would need to navigate the treacherous waters of the palace politics, where tradition was deeply entrenched and resistance to change ran high. Ugochukwu, sensing Adana's uncertainty, stepped forward as her most trusted confidant. Adana, he said one evening as they shared a quiet meal, you are not alone in this. I may not sit on the throne, but I believe in your ability to lead. You have a gift for understanding people, for seeing the bigger picture. I have sat under your wisdom for many years, and I know there is no one more qualified than you for this. I will always be by your side, no matter what. This kingdom needs you. His words gave her strength. Over the coming months, Adana began to step into her role with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. With Ugochukwu by her side, she sought the counsel of the elders, listened to the concerns of the people, and slowly but surely gained the respect of those who had once doubted her. The elders, once uncertain about the woman on the throne, began to see the wisdom in the king's decision. Adana's ability to listen, mediate conflicts, and make decisions based on justice rather than ego set her apart from her brothers. She was not just a ruler, she was a leader. Chibueze, on the other hand, was consumed by his rage. The day of the announcement had been a public humiliation for him, and he could not accept that his sister, though older, had been chosen over him. His pride, nurtured by years of his mother's praise, would not allow him to see reason. Adana, he spat, pacing angrily in his chambers. She is a woman. The throne belongs to me by birthright. How could father do this? Chidinma, equally furious, fanned the flames of his anger. This is an insult to you, my son. You were meant to rule, not her. We cannot let this stand. Driven by bitterness, Chibueze began to plot. He sought allies among the more traditional nobles, those who still believed that the throne should pass to the firstborn son. He whispered of rebellion, suggesting that the kingdom would fall into chaos if a woman were allowed to rule. His anger grew to the point where he began to consider more drastic measures to seize power. But his plans were short-lived. The people of Umodu, who had once admired Chibueze for his strength, began to see him for what he had become, a prince blinded by pride and jealousy. His reckless behavior, his disregard for the kingdom's needs, and his refusal to accept the king's decision only served to further alienate him. When his plot to undermine Adana's authority came to light, the king could no longer ignore his son's treachery. Eze Ikenna summoned Chibueze before the court and gave him an ultimatum: accept Adana as a rightful heir, and serve the kingdom loyally or leave Umodu in exile. Chibueze, unwilling to humble himself, chose exile. He left the kingdom in bitterness, vowing that one day he would return to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. But as he disappeared into the wilderness, it became clear to all that his pride had been his downfall, and he was never heard from again. With Chibueze gone, the kingdom slowly began to accept Adana's leadership. Her reign as crown princess was marked by careful, thoughtful decisions that prioritized the well-being of the people. She instituted reforms that improved trade, education, and the rights of women, ensuring that the kingdom prospered under the rule. The king, seeing the ease with which she handled her duties, began to give her more responsibilities as years passed, making it possible for her to fully understand the enormity of her role as a woman ruler in a land where men had always held power. Ugochukwu remained by her side as her closest advisor, helping her navigate the complexities of leadership. Their bond, forged through years of mutual respect and understanding, grew stronger with each passing day. Together, they brought a new era of peace and stability to Umodo, one that was defined not by the arrogance of power, but by the strength of wisdom and compassion. Adana's leadership was not without its challenges. There were still those in the court who resisted the idea of a woman on the throne, and Chidinma, though weakened by her son's exile, continued to spread whispers of discontent. But Adana, with the support of her mother Amaka, Nnenna and Ugochukwu, stood firm. She knew that change would not come easily, but she was determined to prove that a woman could lead just as effectively, if not more so, than any man. As the years passed, Adana's reign became a symbol of progress and unity. The people, once hesitant to accept her, began to see her as a queen who truly cared for the people. She listened to their needs, valued their voices, and ensured that the throne was a place of justice, not tyranny. Chidinma, once the most powerful and influential wife in the palace, saw her influence wane as Adana's reign took root. Without Chibueze to bluster her ambitions, Chidinma's schemes became more desperate and less effective. The other wives, who had once followed her lead, began to distance themselves from her, aligning instead with Adana's vision for the kingdom. Isolated and bitter, Chidinma was left to reflect on her choices. She had once been celebrated as the mother of the princes, the queen who brought sons to the kingdom, but now she was a relic of a past that no longer held sway. Her arrogance had cost her not only her son, but her standing in the court. She remained in the palace, watching from the sidelines as Adana's stars continued to rise. In the end, Chidinma's legacy was one of squandered potential. She had the chance to be a queen remembered for her wisdom and strength, but instead, she became a cautionary tale of pride and ambition gone too far. Eze Ikenna died at a good old age, content in his choice of a successor, and was buried with a fanfare that no king had ever received. Adana's reign as queen transformed the kingdom of Umodo. She broke the barriers of tradition, proving that leadership was not bound by gender but by the qualities of wisdom, compassion, and justice. With Ugochukwu as her confidant and the support of her mother Amaka, Adana's legacy would be one of progress and unity. In time, the kingdom came to revere her, not just as the first woman to rule Umodo, but as one of its greatest leaders. Her story became a legend passed down through generations as a reminder that true power lies not in birthright, but in the strength of one's character. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.